Right, yeah, that was actually really good. I really like that scene because it's just the best way that I can demonstrate how to write effective dialogue because it was just really snappy, it was funny, it was inventive. You had her increasing tension, the frustration. You had two people witnessing it, which were actually adding, I don't know, I suppose. I mean, when you have two people kind of witnessing something, it adds authenticity to it, I suppose, and makes it seem as big than it actually is. So that's my favourite scene, and that was from the film Five Easy Pieces, which is about this kind of real misogynist guy, Jack Nicholson, who was this really talented pianist when he was younger, but let his life go to ruin. And yeah, it's basically about his relationship with his family and other women. Recommend it. Anyway, welcome to today's call. Hope you enjoyed that little new thing I've experimented with. So today we're going to be looking at how to write realistic dialogue. Let me just pull this up. That should be there. Okay. All right. So how to write realistic or effective dialogue I put here. And the reason for choosing the subject of this call is because I know it's something that we've covered before your time test, but it is something which comes up again and again and again, and with new writers, and it's something which can obviously constantly be refined. And for the majority of people that I have worked with over the years of working with aspiring authors, dialogue is one of the areas which frequently comes up for improvement again and again and again when I see new writers. Very rarely will I meet a new writer who gets dialogue bang on the first time. I can't remember when that happens. Really, really rare. Commonly, writers fall into the same mistakes again and again and again, and we're going to be looking at the top 3 mistakes that they make. And dialogue needs improvement. It's just something that can be worked on. When I first started writing, I hated writing dialogue. It was one of my pet hates, my pet peeves. I would try to avoid writing it actually because I just felt like it wasn't something I was good at. But I worked at it, and I think that's one of the things from today I want you to take away. It can be improved, absolutely can be improved, and it's just about persistence and keep trying different ways to improve it. So today, we start with this quote. And what is the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversation? This is from Lewis Carroll. Most people these days actually do manage to read books without pictures, unless you're a child, or one of those kind of sick people that need lots of photographs. But I know kind of how Alice feels about conversations because when I'm browsing through a book, I pick a book up from the bookshelf, or these days look online at Amazon and look at the look within section. I do have a look to see how much dialogue there is in a book. And if the book seems really dense, i.e. there's not a lot of dialogue, quite commonly I will actually put that book down and choose something else which looks a little bit easier to read. So on a personal level, I do find a lot of dense sort of description or very little dialogue a little bit off-putting. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only person who finds it off-putting either, not to see much dialogue in a book. On the other side of the coin, if I see a book with too much dialogue, again, that puts me off too. So really it's about the balance. For today's call, we're going to look at what function the dialogue serves. One of the things I've really tried to install in you, I hope, over the past, whatever time we've been together, is that a lot of writing serves a function: description, narrative, every word, every sentence, every chapter. And the same with dialogue. It really should serve a specific function. We're going to be looking at dialogue in terms of function. Then we're going to look at 10 top tips for writing realistic dialogue. Then we're going to look at dissection, i.e. that's your stuff. And then if we've got time, we'll look at some other writers' tips for writing effective dialogue. If we haven't got time for anything, I'll just pop it on to the Facebook group anyway. Okay, so let's get going. And then at any point, if you've got questions or you want to speak or whatever you want to do, just, as normal, just say it into the chat box and I'll try and answer them. Any reflections or thoughts, just add them. Okay. So, when prepping for this call, like I said, I did realize I was repeating stuff I may have said before, but if you haven't picked it up yet, and some people don't pick it up straight away, which is fine, then obviously it's worth re-saying. So some of this does cover old ground, and hopefully there's some new ground on here too. Just want to say that, like I said at the beginning, lots of writers do struggle with writing dialogue. So if you haven't mastered it, or if you are on your way to mastering it, don't beat yourself up. It's really not worth it. Um, so personally, like I said, when I was sort of starting out writing, when I was back at uni and I did that screenwriting course actually, I found dialogue really hard, which was a bit of a challenge because I was writing a film. I was writing a film. That was my final year project. I had to write like a 90-minute or 100-minute movie script. And for me, dialogue was my weakest area. I perceived it as my weak area. So it's something I've really learned to refine over the years. And actually working on a movie script and really honing down my writing that was actually just dialogue was a really, really good exercise to do. And that's something which I've got an exercise for you at the end, which maybe help you too. So the biggest aha moment for me, probably around then and maybe even later, was when I realised that dialogue actually was there as a function. You know what I mean? And I might get carried away writing just stuff for the sake of writing. And then when I sort of realised, you know what, my characters aren't just there for no reason. They're not just pretty faces. They're not just saying things it's just throwaway. Really does need to serve a function. Why am I using dialogue in the first place, and what are they saying? So here's the biggest reasons why you would use dialogue. First of all, you show rather than tell. When characters speak, i.e., what they say and how they say it, and any particular or individual nuances that they have. Maybe it's an accent or a dialect or certain words that they repeat or a way of saying it. They become a lot more real to us. How somebody speaks when you see them in the flesh. It's very revealing. What accent do they talk in? Do they talk fast? Do they talk slow? Are they thoughtful? Do they say a lot? Do they not say a lot? Do they use long words? Do they use short words? Yes, so how they speak and what they say is very, very revealing. So that's one of the reasons why you would use your dialogue, because you want to reveal something about your character you haven't been able to reveal, during the course of description, or you want to reveal it in this way, because rather than telling us, that the character, has a fondness for long words, you can demonstrate it through how they speak. Yeah, a level of education, that's a really good one as well. How educated are they? What kind of words do they use? Okay, so that's showing us character through and via the way that they speak rather than telling us. For example, you might want to suggest that your character is university educated. You can say that as a narrator, but that would be telling us. You can actually have it demonstrated two ways through the dialogue. One is just by the level of conversation that they speak at, or it might come out in a bit of dialogue interchange with somebody else. Okay. Another reason for using dialogue is to build tension and drama. So you're furthering the plot. Again, this is a way of furthering the plot, but not actually telling us you're furthering the plot in the narrative. So, for example, you might have a scene where one character is revealing something to another character. For example, maybe you've got a mother and daughter, and the daughter needs to say something to the mum, which is a secret. Maybe she wants to say that she's pregnant, and the mum doesn't know yet. You could describe this scene, and tell us what happens, but it's a lot stronger and a lot more powerful, and I think a lot more tense if you could show that scene through dialogue. It's a lot sharper. You can reveal character and what they say and then what they don't say. So often actually what character doesn't say is actually really revealing. So if we go back to the scene between the mother and the daughter says, "Hey mum, oh God, I'm pregnant." how the mother reacts would be very revealing of her character. Does she get angry? Does she start yelling at the daughter? Does she embrace her in a hug and tell her it's fine? Does she just stand there and do nothing but continue chopping vegetables in a really tense manner? It's a real opportunity there to demonstrate, the reaction of a character on a deeper level, his or her values about something, or what they are thinking about a certain thing, rather than just sort of saying, oh, a mum got really angry, which is obviously really weak, and you wouldn't say that anyway, but you can have a demonstration of that feeling through what they say. And that's another way, going back to point one, of revealing what kind of character you've got on your hands. And you might not even say beforehand that mum's got a really sharp temper, but it could be an opportunity to demonstrate that mum's got this really sharp temper if she fires off the handle at the daughter. And it might be like, oh my God, I've not seen that before in the character. But that's when you realise at that moment that the mum is a bit of a maniac or something. Another really important role of dialogue, which is something I've really picked up on, is that really it's just to create white space on the page. And this goes back to the whole philosophy of picking up a book in the bookshop or on Amazon, flicking through and just seeing, how dense it is or how much white space there is. When you write dialogue, it creates white space that you can see on this page here you're looking at. It's just got one bullet point and the rest of the page is blank. If you compare it to the previous page, there's got a lot more bullet points. And the suggestion is in this that people tend to prefer picking up or reading books where there's more white space, so it's not as dense, it doesn't feel as heavy. If you pick up a book where there's not a lot of dialogue, the impression it might give out is a bit of a Hilary Mantel-esque heavy tome of a book, which for the majority of the reader is quite off-putting. If you wanted to be writing a more mainstream book, and I'm thinking Tess here, a lot of mainstream books do have a fast dialogue, makes a faster pace. If you've got a couple of pages where it's dialogue driven, the feel of the book not only looks faster to read, so it feels better, it actually reads faster as well. So one of the reasons for putting dialogue in is because actually you want to give the impression of you want to give the impression to the reader that you've got a faster book, and actually you are writing a faster pace. Dialogue tends to pick up the pace, especially if it's quick. Yes, it is a good thing. I mean, it depends on you, doesn't it? I mean, if you want to write like a mainstream type book, which you do, having quite a lot of dialogue is actually a quick thing. It's a good thing because it speeds up the pace and it actually makes it faster to read. By that, I don't mean long chunks of dialogue where one person is talking. I mean more an interchange, like a tennis match being battered back and forth across the page. It just reads a bit quicker. Do you have to turn narrative into dialogue? You may do, I mean, I would suggest you get to the end of the book and you look at the ratio of dialogue to narration and you see what it is. I don't know what the ratio normally is. I haven't got those stats. I'm not going to make it up for you, but you might find that maybe if you've got 90% narration and 10% dialogue, then for sure that you could change some scenes to dialogue. And you could look at certain scenes and actually question, actually, could I have written this as dialogue instead? Which you could do. If you're still struggling with dialogue, then I wouldn't necessarily do that, but it's one way to quicken up the book, that's all I'm saying. And another thing is I've realised that when I'm writing, and maybe I'm conscious that if I've got a couple of pages I've just been narrating or describing, I'll realise, oh, hang on a second, I need to actually pop some dialogue in now just to break up the rhythm and to change the rhythm. So really it's about having one ear open to the rhythm of your book as well. I think we're all guilty of that, but that's just conscious awareness. So you're bringing your attention to it. So it's like, okay, I've gone for 2 pages. Oh shit, and I've been writing a lot. How can I change the rhythm now? Okay. So listen to that. And I do that as well. And it's such an easy thing to do as well. It's all about, I think, if you listen to an orchestra. There's so many different beats and sounds and depth going on. You hear a variety of sounds. Whereas if it was the oboe the whole time, it would just feel a bit samey. And it's the same as your book. You're creating an orchestra of sounds, but through words. So really, when you're conscious that you've been writing in a certain way, i.e. maybe narrative or description for a while, just, I know it's, bung in a bit of dialogue. If your character is by themselves, you can have that character talk out loud to themselves, that's okay. You might say, oh my God, what's going on here? Or what have I got here? Or, oh, what do I do? Or something, have them talk out loud just to break it up. Another way of breaking it up is obviously to write different sentence constructions and different vocabulary and stuff like that, which we've covered before. But that's a really good tip about just creating a different rhythm on the page. So that's the different functions of dialogue. So when you're writing dialogue or you're just writing, just think of the function of it rather than just like, oh, I'm writing dialogue. I think writing requires a certain amount of thought to it as well. Okay, thanks, Tess. Good advice. Right, 10 top tips. Number 1, watch your dialogue tags. I think Stephen King calls it attribution. I'm pretty sure that he does. So it's the same term, attribution tags, dialogue attribution. So a tag is basically the bit that you put before or after dialogue, like said, asked, replied, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, he's very strict in actually what they should be. And then the point being that, he actually does say this, and I've read this numerous times, which probably all stems back to what he says. You do want to be avoiding too many adverbs, like she shrieked, or verbs, active verbs, I put. She shrieked, she swore, she bellowed, or she said angrily, he said nastily, he said viciously, she said snidely. Basically the dialogue should convey the emotion. You don't need, if you're having to say how it's said, then you've not conveyed it strongly enough. So not only should the dialogue say it, but the words around it, how they've been behaving prior to that, or what kind of person that they are anyway, that should imply it. So if you're having to put things like angrily or viciously or nastily, it means that you're not writing your dialogue strong enough, and it means that you haven't put enough characterization into your characters as well to imply, how that sentence is going to be said. So, for example, going back to the mother and daughter thing, where the daughter says to mum, look, I'm pregnant. Oh, I'm pregnant, she said shyly, or something. But really, if you'd built up that the character was very shy anyway and found it really hard to convey her emotions, and you built up that this scene was such a big deal to her, you wouldn't need to say shyly in that scene anyway. That's not to say that you never have an adverb or an active verb, because you do. You just don't use them all the time. You use them very, very sparingly, okay? You can, like, for example, I've put whispered and shouted sometimes, but you don't need to get fancier than that. To be honest with you, when you've got, she couldn't look at her mum, she whispered, Mum, I'm pregnant. Yeah. When you've got things like, mumbling awkwardly, or he said hysterically and stuff like that, the reader starts to notice that, and it detracts from the actual dialogue. When you've got said and, and says and stuff, it's very invisible, so the reader actually doesn't notice it. And that's what you really want to be happening. You don't want the reader being distracted from what's actually being said. So stuff like shouted furiously or said happily, it's just, it's OTT. If the dialogue is well written, you know that it's going to be like that anyway. Okay? When you're young, obviously, putting in words like whispered and shouted and pondered is a great way to learn vocabulary. But you're not at school anymore, so, you got to be more subtle than that and be more inventive. Alrighty. Two, okay, ground your dialogue in a scene. I see this so much. So basically, it's really easy to fall into the trap of talking heads. That would be two characters discussing something in lines of dialogue with little or no supporting text. So basically, every conversation that takes place needs to be somewhere. Okay, location or scene makes a real difference to the dialogue. People forget to do this. Even if your characters are talking on the phone, you need to actually place them where they are. Otherwise, the dialogue just feels like it's in a speech bubble. It's not grounded. It's not anywhere. And then all the reader ends up thinking, "Oh, where are they?" And then if the reader starts asking questions of your writing, then they're distracted from the actual content. So basically, where are your characters? Are they like in suggestions? Are they in a busy coffee shop? Are they driving? Are they on a train? Are they walking through a forest? Are they cooking? Are they watching TV? Normally, I prefer them to be doing stuff, actually, to be honest with you. It's easier to have them being active as they're speaking rather than just being stationary. That just makes it easier to add in kind of that grounding. And then who's nearby? Is there anyone nearby? There might not be anybody nearby at all, but maybe it's just the rest of the people in the coffee shop. Maybe she's buying her coffee at the same time and she's being served by the waitress or the barrister. Maybe it's somebody looking across at them on the train, earwigging the conversation or whatever. Basically, you don't need to put action or description after every line of dialogue, but you do need to have a sense that your character is physically located in a particular specific setting, and that's something that I've seen happen a lot. In terms of speaking of dialogue on the phone, personally, I tend to avoid phone conversations, unless absolutely necessary. If you've got two characters speaking on the phone, I would say, actually, do I really need this? Can I actually have them meet up, or do I need this scene at all? If it's absolutely unavoidable that you actually do need two characters speaking on the phone. So I remember in Voices of Angels, I had Lizzie phone her mum a couple of times from Spain to England. What you do is you can use the tone of voice of both of them, and you can use any background noise to sort of add to the scene. So when Lizzie phoned her mum, she was at the office and you could hear the clicking of the heels, the closing of the door, and her coming to the phone. And on the phone conversation, I think there was quite a few silences, and at Lizzie's end, she was sitting in the sort of direct sunlight, so she was dripping in sweat or something like that. So it just adds something to it rather than just that straight dialogue phone conversation, which again is readers want to see the surroundings of the dialogue. Whenever you're talking to someone in the flesh here, it's never just a conversation. You've always got an awareness of what's going on around you. So remember to kind of include that awareness in any phone conversation, or in any conversation, not just a phone conversation. Use dialect and accents with caution. Well, it's quite a funny one, actually. One mistake that new writers make is they often go really over the top with dialect and accents, and what it does, it just makes it really hard to read, and it actually could also be like unintentionally funny or even maybe offensive. And so generally less is more. So for example, if you've got a Scottish person, they don't need to sound like a Burns poem. I thought that was funny. Use the occasional word like we, as in W-E-E, not as in the urine sense, but as in that Scottish small sense, and the reader will get the idea. When I was writing Rafa, he obviously spoke in a Spanish accent, and I tried to convey that through how he spoke, because obviously their sentence structure and their grammar is different, and often Spanish-speaking people would put maybe the adjective after the verb and things like that, and they say certain words. So I tried to put that in, but I didn't want to make it every time, because A, he needed to be a fairly decent English speaker to be able to have this relationship, and B, again, I didn't want it to be that jarring. So, if you've got characters in a foreign language, the occasional sort of, dropping of the Spanish or the French word or whatever is fine. You wouldn't want it all the time, because it just becomes annoying, I think. Similarly, going back to the education theme that Tess brought up, if you have got an uneducated character, you don't need to have them talking in complete non-educated grammar the entire time. Phrases like maybe ain't, I hate that word by the way, ain't will establish their voice. So you don't need to start knocking letters of every word, like, you know what I mean? Like taking T's out of the word or knocking off the final G and stuff like that, Yeah, so careful of that. Yeah, that did add to its hotness. You're right. Yeah, him having the occasional Spanish word added to the hotness. Okay. So, or it's another mistake I see a lot, and that would be one character speaking a really, really, really long time, almost like giving like a talking head type speech, where they're just kind of an Alan Bennett play, where they're just kind of like got this massive soliloquy monologue going on, almost as if it's kind of Hamlet. And it's just boring, it's just boring, and it's unrealistic, and it's off-putting, all those kind of things. So the main rule here, if your characters have long blocks of speech, break them up. In real life, we don't normally give long speeches during regular conversations. Okay, in this context, I am giving a long speech to you almost. I am being Hamlet. But if you were writing this webinar, you wouldn't necessarily write it verbatim right from the beginning to the end. You might, start at the beginning, a few lines at the beginning, and then a few lines at the end, and then a narrative summary of what was said in between. You wouldn't necessarily transcribe me. So, yeah, when you kind of got characters speaking for too long, and lots of people do this, I've seen it a lot of times, so Tess, don't, okay, whatever, anyone that does this, it's fine. But what you want to be doing is breaking those blocks of speech up. So other characters, so let's say you've got Tess talking loads about, tarot cards and witches and whatever, and she's just waffling on and on and on. And in real life, you might let her waffle on because you might be too polite to butt in. But in fiction, Christine would butt in. So, Tessa's waffling on about witches, and Christine butts in. Okay, what oh yeah, I've heard this thing about this witches. What do you think of that? Or or ask for clarification. Or Tessa's waffling on, and then you cut to Christine kind of nodding her head or yawning or whatever. Basically, you give the impression that it's a conversation going back and forth. You don't just have a character speaking for a long amount of time. The definition for me of a long block of speech is a paragraph, a long paragraph. And for me, I know it's too long when I read it back in my head, and I can feel that it needs to have had a natural pause or a breath. And when I read that long paragraph back and I see that it needs a bit of a breath, I then break it up. Obviously, at some point, you might have a character having a long speech, but the beauty of actually only having a few long speeches is that when they do happen, and they then have more meaning or resonance or power behind them, because it doesn't actually happen that much. So here's the sort of summary of that. When you have got a character sort of giving a long block of speech, and my suggestion is that a paragraph, like 4 or 5 sentences is actually quite long. You want to have it more of an exchange. So you can have it more somebody else butting in, asking for clarification, you make it more of a conversation, or you have a non-verbal response. At some point, you might actually deliberately want to have a long block of speech because somebody's making a heart, when somebody's revealing something from the heart or something like that, or like a big revelation moment or aha moment, or this is what I've learned moment. Then you might actually do want to have a long block of speech. So you leave it more or less then as it is to give that more power, but still, do read it back. And if there is a natural break that's needed in it, do put it in. The key thing is really for me is that when I read it, and then you can just hear, where there should be a pause or a breath. Again, it's going back to rhythm. So when you're saying something and you realise that it needs a bit of a, the breath pause there, that's when you have maybe the other character butting in or asking for clarification or whatever it is going on. Okay. Okay. Realistic doesn't mean real. So lots of authors try really hard to make their dialogue like super realistic, like lots of and hesitations, repetitions, and so on. So it kind of needs to be a little bit over the top. Dialogue basically is supposed to give an impression of real speech, but it's not supposed to be a transcript of how we really talk. If it were a transcript of how we really talk, then it would be a lot more, lot of the ers and the and just a lot more kind of stop-starty and jarring and not really that real. When you read kind of those transcripts of how people have spoken, you realise actually it's just like a really long-winded version of dialogue in fiction. So what fiction dialogue does is take real speech and just sharpens it up, So when you look at your dialogue and you go back and edit it, you want your text to flow smoothly, characters speak in realistic sounding sentences, but they're also really clear sentences. They perhaps do stumble or hesitate at times, but only when it's warranted by what's going on. So daughter telling her mum she's pregnant, yes, she might hesitate in that particular moment because it's a big moment, but you wouldn't have her hesitating and stuttering in every single sentence that she speaks. So you use hesitations and ums and ahs at specific moments, what I say, when a character probably is, nervous about what they're saying. Number 6, give your characters distinct speech patterns. Do all your characters speak and sound exactly the same? If they do, you need to do some tweaking. It's actually really hard to get your characters sounding quite different, I have to admit, but a lot of it comes from their own, who they are really. So there's a list of things here that you can look at, but ultimately I think it's about dropping down into the character and just sort of dropping down into their sentence and being someone that can sit in somebody else's skin and just sort of think, well, how does this person sort of think and feel? Here's some guidelines, like age. Obviously, a 13-year-old is going to speak differently from a 17-year-old. Gender, men and women may use different vocabulary. Social background, does your character use down-to-earth words or posh ones? How educated are they? Are they got a wide or limited vocab? Where do they live? Would that influence it? Particular catchphrases, like, don't go overboard here. That'd be really irritating. But do consider whether your character has any common phrases. And then verbosity, like we said earlier on, some people tend to babble, others not talk as much. One good trick to actually look at this is to sort of take a chunk of dialogue from your book and then cut out the action or the dialogue tags and see whether you can work out who said what. If you can't, you've got an issue. Again, what I go back to, which isn't on this list, but what just came to me is like, sit in your character, sit in the soul of your character without sounding cheesy about it, really get inside their shoes and take a moment to really connect with them, and then speak or write their dialogue as if like you're channeling them, I suppose. When you get these psychics that channel spirits and the voice comes through them, it's almost like you want to be doing that. And obviously, so you're paying attention to, all the things that's just covered on this list. You want to be really connecting with the essence of who they are. And then it's kind of like, they do sort of write themselves, particularly if you've got a strong character, they will come through you. They literally come through you. And go, oh, okay, well, I didn't know this was coming. And quite often dialogue characters, I feel anyway, that they represent different parts of you, the different, but they all say that we're made up of like so many different kind of personalities, and as writers we're giving voice to them. Maybe they're more enhanced or exaggerated versions of ourselves, but if you've got like the mentor type figure, for example, in your book, here's a chance for you to really step into your, your higher self, the wise self. And it's quite often surprising to see actually what comes out when you give permission to go into that space and see what comes out of you. Or maybe you go into the space of being, the bullied person, or the person that's been downtrodden, who's resentful. Just step into those different spaces and see what comes out, because really, your characters are sort of representations of yourself on a different level. If you can connect with them, and be schizophrenic and have multiple personality disorder, you're able to write it a lot better, what I'm saying. Number 7, don't put exposition in the dialogue. By exposition, I mean information that you need to convey to the reader about what's going on. So, for example, you want to tell the reader that your character went to university, and that university had some also experience and this has affected them for the rest of their life. You wouldn't necessarily have a dialogue exchange where the character says, "Oh, I went to university and this happened. It was so awful. It affected me for the rest of my life." It just comes across really stagey and just fake. No one really talks like that. So you're avoiding having characters kind of reveal too much information about themselves, unless it's forced out of them. If that information about going to university and having a dreadful thing happen had been coaxed or forced out of them bit by bit, then it's a lot more realistic than just sort of blurting it all out and coming forth. Then it just feels like you're just, I don't know, you're just trying to get across information in a really heavy-handed, blunt way. Also, again, avoid having characters tell things that actually they logically already know. "Hey, sister," isn't it? It's something like that. It's just clumsy and awful. It was embarrassing to have stuff like that happen. So you just want to be during the conversation. Like, for example, if two friends are catching up after 10 years apart, they might well fill each other in on the details of their work, family, and lives in general. If they're meeting after just 1 week apart, they wouldn't do it then, would they? So, just make sure that the setup is appropriate of everything if you are wanting to use dialogue to convey emotion. Use silence as well as words. Like, sometimes what's not said is more powerful than what is said. So let's get back to the kitchen scenario where daughter, let's say she's 15, has just told mum that she's pregnant. If mum sort of has just a massive silence and says nothing, that's actually really powerful, because the reader will be thinking, "Oh my God, what's mum thinking? How's she going to react?" And then the daughter's kind of going to be more afraid of the actual reaction that's going to come. And also, like, maybe if you've got a lover scene and one character says, "I love you," and the other person doesn't say anything, that's actually way more powerful than any kind of verbal response. If you don't want the other character to say "I love you" back, it kind of leaves a massive gap, doesn't it? All your fears are kind of put into it. So, and also when a character refuses to respond to a particular question, or like doesn't want to speak to a certain person, the reader like straight away knows something's wrong without the author having to say, "Oh, so-and-so didn't want to talk about his marriage," or Mary hadn't been on speaking terms with her mum-in-law for years. You just know through the dialogue that there's an issue there. This is a good one. This is what I learned at uni, actually. Get in late, leave early. I don't remember much from university, but that was one of the key things. Always leave a seat, always get into a scene late and leave it early. So when I've been looking at the stuff that I wrote last year for fiction book, I've been reviewing it, and I've realised some of the scenes I've started at the beginning, where actually I can just get rid of the first beginning and just start it in the action. I don't need them getting ready for the party. Just have them start going to the party. You understand? You don't need the getting ready part. Just need them straight in the action. So the same with dialogue. You don't need to begin with the conversation at the first word and then the last word. So if somebody's talking on the phone, for example, you need to cut out all the "hi, how are you," and "fine, thanks," and they're realistic, but it's not really interesting. So you just cut to the main part of the dialogue you actually want to get to. And that's the only part of the dialogue you really need sometimes. You know, you don't even necessarily, you don't need to sort of have byes and see you next time. Often it's also really powerful to end a scene or a chapter on a line of dialogue, you know, which is quite a powerful last line. We don't need to see how the other character responds. So maybe, you know, you end that on that line of dialogue, and the next chapter begins with not the rest of that conversation, but actually what happens next. So, you know, maybe, you know, the line ends with "I'm pregnant." Oh my God, you know, and then you turn the chapter, and then you know, what's going to happen next? Yeah, 20 pages disappeared. Yeah, we all do it, you know. Just it's a really common thing actually. Like when people start writing their books, quite commonly I suggest they get rid of the entire chapter one, because people tend to write their books before the beginning. You know, they have way too much backstory and stuff like that, and it's just so dreary. And then chapter two often starts where it should start. You know, the beginning. You know, the active point. And it's the same with your chapters. You know, look at how they're starting. For example, if they're going to a restaurant, you know, you could actually start in the restaurant. You don't need to start with them walking into the restaurant or deciding to go to the restaurant, or, you know, leaving the house to go to the restaurant, unless that has got some element when you're adding to the plot line. Yeah, you know, lots of things like that. Just always look at how you can start a scene, look a little bit later than it actually is. But now we have to put some dialogue there before we start. Yeah. Actually, starting a chapter with dialogue is really good too. It's a really good way to start a chapter, and ending a chapter with dialogue is an easy way to get the chapter going, and it's an easy way to get it into the middle of the chapter, into the middle of the action. Oh my God! So you told mum you were pregnant. What happened? Blah. You know, that's what goes on next. And then finally, on these 10 top tips, now we need to start moving on to that beer. Yeah. Finally, on the 10 top tips, it's all about punctuation. So you want your novel to be, you know, as professional as possible, particularly if you're, you know, submitting to agents or publishers. And it's also kind of key if you're self-publishing. So dialogue should begin on a new line for each new speaker. People are still not doing this. Have double or single quotation marks. This came up in the group. Be consistent. So the US is double and the UK is single. Have punctuation inside the quotation marks. I don't know, Tess. Depends whether you are submitting to US or English publishers, really. That would be the question. I don't know what the Norwegian standard is. So if you wanted to submit to US, you go double, and to the UK, go single. And then I'll probably Google what do Norway use if it's, you know, submitting to Norway. So punctuation inside the question mark. So if somebody asks a question, you know, the question mark should come inside the quotation mark, for example. Full stops, if it's the end of a sentence, should come inside the quotation mark. End the dialogue line with a comma if you're adding a dialogue tag, like she said, but end with a full stop if you're adding an action. So, example, Joe, please come here, Sarah said. So we've got Joe, please come here, and then a comma after here, because then we've got a dialogue tag. We need to talk. Yeah, possibly. Yes, it might do. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. And then what about, Sarah says, oh, hang on, I've missed that. Joe, please come here, Sarah said. We need to talk. We've got the comma before the dialogue tag. What about, says Joe. You know what? Then we've got a full stop because we haven't got a dialogue tag. We've got she folded her arms. Okay, which is a sentence like description. Hopefully that's clear. I actually didn't really know that when I wrote my book. I had somebody edit it and did all that for me, but something I actually should know, and I do know now. So there we go. The mistakes that I see are obviously around the punctuation, the use of the full stops and the comma, and also about, you know, not having the characters speak on the same line, on same lines. So they have, like, you know, everybody speaking on the same line. You know, if you go back to Joe, please come here, that's all on the same line. We don't have Joe, please come here, new line, Sarah said, new line, we need to talk, because it's Sarah talking the whole time. It's all one sentence. Because the next sentence is Joe, that drops down to a new line. And the new line again, because it's Sarah again, you know what, she folded her arms. And again, she folded her arms stays on the same line as the dialogue, because it's related to the dialogue. Right. Now we're going to do, oh, hang on a second, the 3 biggest mistakes I see. And this is not just through you, with you in the group, it's with all the years that I've spent helping authors. One character talking for too long, so it just sounds unrealistic, clunky. I see that a lot over the years. That's when you've got to be kind of breaking up long speeches, Tess rambling for too long, Christine needs to break it up. Have your other characters be aggressive, Whereas in real life, you might let them waffle on. In fiction, be more aggressive and assertive. Talking ahead, that's the other biggest mistake I've always seen, not grounding a scene. So people are just talking in a bubble rather than placing it in a location like a wood or a cafe, or having them do something as they're talking. And then finally, incorrect punctuation just makes it incredibly hard to read. And instantly Sarah just says, oh my God, amateur. So those are the 3 biggest mistakes I've seen over the years. So if you've fallen into any one of these 3, or all 3, you're not alone, because everyone seems to do it. Right, now we're going to do some dissection. Now, I have got a confession here. I've only got Tessa's to dissect. The reason being, lovely Christine, is because I looked at yours, and even though I've got a few minor changes for you, A, your piece was like a little bit too long, and the dialogue was spread out, so it was harder to actually do and put on the page. And B, my changes were just too, they were too small really to sort of show, to demonstrate what I'm talking about, because you've been a little bit longer and you have developed along the way, I'm pleased to say. But I will upload the changes to the course, to the group, because there are a couple of changes. It's just not really enough to show you here. But overall, great. You've really developed your dialogue since we first got together, which is fantastic. I think just talking I'm going to have a look at it as I say now. When you I'm looking at the second scene when they were having breakfast, and looking at the red geranium. When you say things like the red geranium is still there, he laughed like a schoolboy. You could, for example, just put he said. It's like or he whispered. That's maybe one element to do. You've got Elodie looked at him with a quizzical look on her face and then laughed. You don't need to whisper, they can't hear us. Alan was jabbing his finger towards the window, a large smile spreading across his face. Maybe one thing you could be doing is just use the word subtle. Okay, be a little bit more subtle, just use more said. Later on, you've got across the building, it's him, exclamation mark, Elodie gasped. A, you don't need to have gasped, because it's him, exclamation mark, suggests the gasp. And B, you could just put Elodie said, or I would just get rid of that altogether. You don't need it. It's obvious that it's Elodie, and it's obvious that it's a gasp, so just get rid of it altogether. But overall, it's in that text you were talking quite a lot in passive, so again I'd be wanting to change it to more active. And also just maybe putting in just a few more saids instead of especially that line, the red geranium is still there, he laughed like a schoolboy, it's like a spy novel, he whispered. The red geranium is still there, he whispered, it's like a spy novel. I would probably just put that. And then Elodie looked at him with a quizzical look on her face, which is actually weird. Elodie looked at him quizzically maybe, and then laughed. Or you don't even then laugh. You don't need to whisper, they can't hear us. So just toning it down a little bit, I suppose. I'm trying to say maybe you've taken my direction and gone to the other extremes, and now it's about rebalancing down, and sometimes just using said and trying to make the attribution and the tags a bit more invisible and sort of flow in. and have a tendency not to have laughed so much. Maybe that just was this excerpt, though, to be fair. And trusting that when you're kind of putting things like, it's him, you don't necessarily need to explain how they're saying it. Okay. All right. So that's you, but I'll put that in the group anyway. But basic thing is like really good, but toned down. What I'm going to do now is test. Right. Right. So, Tess, thank you for this. I don't think because it was in the group that you were able to format it properly because it was put up on Facebook. So I respect that. So what I've also done is I've put up your version here, which is how it was presented in the group, and then I put a suggested rewritten version, which I've actually formatted as it should be. But obviously, because when we put things in Facebook, you actually can't get the format correct anyway. That's where that came from. Yeah, it does. I tried to do this whole thing on Dialogue once, and I had all the formatting in place, and I posted it, and it lost all the formatting. So my whole effectiveness was lost, basically. Right. So we'll read through it together. I recognise you from somewhere. Marina's voice weak, and her head's protesting loudly. Her face breaks into a grimace. Yes, sweetie, I bet you do. But this is a small town, and you've probably seen me around. What is it with people in this town, she thought. She had never known me before, yet it seemed so many people were familiar to her. Her head, still aching, made it impossible to pursue the thought, and she quickly forgot about it. Jackie put a tray with a bowl of soup, a napkin, a spoon, and a large glass of water down to next to Marina's bed, and walked back to the door. I think you should eat this and rest, and when you feel like it, you can come downstairs. If you don't mind, I'd like to have a little look at the flower beds leading up to your main door. It looks like you can do with some help in this garden. There are many things there, and maybe you'd like to restore them. I'm big into herb gardens, and there's something really special about old ones. Marina looked at her as she walked out the room. She decided that although she had no idea who that woman was, she just decided to both like her and trust her. She picked up her spoon and began to eat. I really like the last sentence in that. I really love that last kind of image that you give. Right, so before I give my presented version, what are your thoughts? Christine and Tess, what do you hear? I know it's weird when somebody reads out your writing, which is why I did that for you. So what do you hear? Having heard everything that we've heard today on today's call, how would you assess it and what would you change? Yep, definitely. That's the first thing that I thought as well. That last long thing, that last long speech that Jackie gives needs to sort of, particularly because she's talking about, two different sort of subjects here. First of all, she says, I think you should eat this and rest. And when you feel like it, you can come downstairs, which is all about how Marina is feeling. And then you've got, and if you don't mind, I'd like to have a look at the flower beds, which is all about the flower beds. So they are obviously two different subjects. And what you've got them in together in the same paragraph. But because there's two different sort of subjects going on, that's a really natural place to put a pause downstairs because she changes tact in the conversation. Yep. I like the warmth that comes through from Jackie. Oh yeah, Christine. Yeah. And Jackie's actions are really strong in this. So yeah, in that last bit of paragraph, I definitely would, especially when you've got two different subjects in the conversation going on. You want to break that up. Do you pick up anything else? If not, we can go on to the suggested version. Okay. Right. I recognise you from somewhere. Her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. Yes, sweetie, I bet you do. Now don't you sit up on my account. I've embellished this quite a lot. Jackie bustled over to the bed. Placing, should be not playing, a tray with a bowl of soup, a napkin, and a large glass of water by her bedside. This is a small town, and you've probably seen me around. what is it with people in this town? She'd never knowingly been here before, yet it seemed so many people were familiar to her. Her head still ached, making it impossible to pursue the thought. She quickly forgot about it. I think you should eat this and rest, and when you feel like it, you can come downstairs. Jackie paused, and if you don't mind, I'd like to have a little look at the flower beds leading up to your main door. It looks like you can... Hang on, can't read it because that thing is in the way. It looks like you can do with some help in the garden. Marina nodded gratefully. Oh yes, that would be great. Thank you. There are just so many herbs out there, and I thought maybe you'd like to restore them. She walked to the door, resting her hand on the handle. Call me an old fuddy-duddy, but I'm big into herb gardens, and there's something so special about old ones. And then the last paragraph is exactly how you left it. So what I've done is two parts, really. I've embellished a little bit. So we put in the, now don't sit up on my account, and I've brought forward the bustling over to the bed. So I've actually had action, yeah. So previously, when Jackie started speaking previously, like, yes, sweetie, I bet you do, but this is a small town, you've probably never seen me before. We didn't actually know what she was doing. She just entered the room, and then she starts speaking, and then Marina starts reflecting on it being a small town, blah, 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 blah. And then Jackie actually entered the room halfway through, you know, and then with the plates. What I've done is give Jackie an action earlier on in the scene. So she's placed and it's grounded what she's doing. Okay, yeah. So Jackie immediately has an action, and then that was the first bit, and then the final bit was at the end was breaking up that long speech. And I broke it up into two ways. One was like, you know, because I said previously there were two different subjects going on. They're looking after Marina and then the garden. So I've got a break. So this is literally Jackie paused, or it could be Jackie said, or it could be anything there. You know, I think you should eat this and rest, blah, 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 blah. Jackie paused. And then new subject. Now she starts talking about the garden. I put in an and, ... just to suggest that Jackie felt hesitant or to bring this up, or a bit shy to bring it up. Again, that just depends on the kind of character she is. I thought maybe it might be okay, but she might be a lot bolder. In this case, she wouldn't actually put that there. That just suggests that she's a bit more kind of reticent. And so rather than have the entire speech before, which is actually quite long, it looks like you can do with some help. There's just so many herbs out there. I think I like to restore them. I'm really big into herb gardens. I broke that long speech up because it was, hang on a second, previously that long speech had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sentences in it. Okay, yeah. So what I've done is I put, and if you don't mind, I'd like to have a little look at the flower beds leading up to the main door. It looks like you can do some help in the garden, excuse me, which is 2 sentences. And then we have an interruption. Marina nodded gratefully. Marina could do anything there. Marina could just nod gratefully. Marina could just nod. The adverb's quite unnecessary, actually. Or you can actually say anything, but the point being it's an interruption of a long speech. Okay? Or I just say, you know, whatever going on there, but it breaks up that long speech because somebody else is intersecting in it. And then Jackie has the chance to finish the sentence. Again, it's 2 sentences, but I've broken it up twice because I felt like it could do a natural pause. And then you often have the description or the narration breaking up the 2 clauses. So you've got, there's just so many herbs, or, you know, and then we've got call me an old fuddy-duddy, which I just added. And then I put the sentence, description sentence in the middle of it, rather than at the beginning or at the end with the 2 clauses together. If you've got 2 clauses or 2 sentences, put the description in the middle of it to separate, so it's a sandwich of them. Yeah, she could do anything there to smile gratefully or whatever. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't really matter. The point being, it was just an interruption. I was just plucking at anything to write. Yeah. And then the final sentence was the same. Yeah. Okay, so that was a really good example, thank you, illustrating lots of our points. I'm just going back into whole character. when she says, call me an old fuddy-duddy, you know, I don't think she is an old fuddy-duddy, but it's characterization, you know, the kind of person that she is too. And then you've got the five sentences in one paragraph. I personally don't try and do more than 2 sentences or 3 max without putting some kind of narration or description to break it up. Often, you know, I put it in the middle rather than at the end. Then I might have like, you know, 1 sentence, Jackie pause, and another sentence rather than 1 sentence, Jackie pause. You know, I try and break it up a little bit, but obviously it depends, you know, from what you're doing each time. You know, you wouldn't always want it the same rhythm. Again, it's about the rhythm. Sometimes you might want the Jackie pause or the Jackie said at the end. But often I tend to put it in the middle, if that makes sense. Does anybody have any questions at any of today? And I haven't got time to go through all the other writers' stuff, but I'll pop them up into the group. The other additional tips. So yeah, any other questions or anything like that you want to comment on or say or whatever? Yeah, okay. All right then. Okay. I think to end with, you know, don't beat yourself up if you're not getting it perfect. Yeah, yes, I put yours as a RAR test. Yeah. Don't beat yourself up if you're not getting it perfect. It takes practice. Yeah. You know, look at it's very much about refining it, even to the small detail. I think, like, you know, Tess wants to get to sort of Christine's level, but Christine was once at Tess's level, if that makes sense. It's just that you've been in the group 6 months longer. And then for Christine, you know, it's all about stages. Christine, your next level is to refine it even more. It's about the placement of your sort of narrative breakups, like, you know, the Jackie pause or the Jackie busted over to the bed. It's where you're putting it. And it's about sometimes actually not putting it at all, but about putting seds instead of making it more subtle. There's constantly a work in progress, okay? Yeah, it does. Yeah, definitely. Give you good hints about your next draft. It's all about refinement. Yeah, so it's a work in progress. And the one thing I was going to actually sort of tip I was going to give you as a possible sort of exercise, which I'll just leave you with, which may help you, is one thing that you could do just to help your dialogue is to like take a scene that you haven't actually written yet, so take a new scene and have a scene where you're quite clear what's going to happen, so not an overly long scene, and then write the scene with just dialogue only, and that's it. So you only have 2 characters speak, other characters may be implied, but you know, but you just basically have 2 characters speaking and it's dialogue only. You know, you can use quotation marks, or you might not use quotation marks, that's not important. But basically, you know, you're telling the story through the dialogue itself. There's no attribution either. Don't bother with attribution that she said and the tags, anything like that. It's literally the dialogue only. And that might help you to really work on your dialogue too. And then afterwards you can go back and then you can fill in all the tags, I would say. And then the attribution, and then you can go and then you can fill in, you know, the breaks between the sentences as well, like the words of narration, what I call the dynamic dialogue, you know, the Jackie buffered over to the bed and the pausing and the stuff like that. So that's a good exercise to try and do as well. Might be something you can do in the group, so I'll reference that in the group in more detail. Okay, all right, time to go, 10:11. Time to do some writing. Get on with the day. And I'll also post a link to that 5 easy pieces diner scene in case you wanted to watch it again too. All right. Thank you for joining me today. And have a good one. And I'll see you soon. Bye.